Hey gardeners, it's October 15th, 2023. As you can see, we're standing near my high density mango area, taking off the shade cloth just recently. We've had some interesting weather patterns where it's been cooler than normal, and then now we're back above normal with our high being at 100 degrees Fahrenheit tomorrow. Despite that, the plants are looking pretty good. They're really enjoying this weather actually. They get to cool down a little bit at night and still have that heat during the day to put on growth. But today I'm going to talk to you about a new plant, a new addition that I added this year, which is the Imbe, or African mangosteen. So Latin name is Garcinia livingstonei. So this is a relative of the mangosteen. It's in that Garcinia family. Mangosteen is highly regarded, queen of fruits. Unfortunately, it's not something that we can grow in our climate unless you have a controlled environment within a greenhouse where you can pump in humidity and keep the temperature where the plant needs it. It really needs a truly tropical environment to thrive. So while that's not a real practical option in our environment, Imbe is. Just recently got acquainted with this plant, learned more about it, and decided to give it a try in my backyard. As you can see here, I've got one in the ground, right in front there, on a slight mound. Just planted this yesterday. It's very, very close to my starfruit. Everything in this area is very high density. But to give you some background on this plant, it is actually originally from Africa. And as you'll see in this picture, the fruit is plum-like. Fairly small, and it has a bright orange skin. Now it does have a fairly large seed, but the pulp around it is very, very juicy and said to be kind of this acid-sweet taste to it. And I've heard people describe it as resembling apricot, citrus, and mango, so that combination. So very unique fruit. Leaves here have a dark green coloring as they mature. So one caveat with this plant is it does actually require both a male and a female tree generally for pollination and fruit set, as Imbe is almost always dioecious. Now I have read that if you've got isolated female trees, they will put on some fruit orthenocarpically, but the quality of the fruit is going to be much better if you have a male pollinator. So for the most part, if you're buying a seedling, I don't know exactly the odds, but very high odds that it's going to be either an entirely male or an entirely female tree. There are rare occurrences of hermaphrodite trees as well where it's self-fertile, but I wouldn't count on that unless you can source a grafted plant from a known hermaphrodite tree. Best chance for fruit set is if you have 2 or 3 plants planted in close proximity or, in container culture near each other. So you can see I've got one here, and then for that reason I've also got one planted over here, just a few feet away. This is probably about 5 feet away. I'm standing on the opposite side and just wanted to show you that I also have 4 of these in container culture. So this one, as well as this one, I bought earlier this year from Coco Tropics 239 on eBay, and they've put on some growth, but they're fairly slow growing. I've also got 2 that I just purchased that were reported to be hermaphrodite seedlings. I want to take that with a grain of salt because I'm not sure how you could guarantee that unless it's grafted. And these plants for sure were not grafted, they're from seed. The reason I have so many is just to ensure that I have a male and female out of the lot. Most people would just suggest getting 3 plants for that, for those odds. But what I intend to do is graft the male plant onto the female and vice versa, so that I can get a self-fertile tree. The only way to really know whether you have male or female is to wait until the plant flowers. If you have a female tree, when it flowers, it's going to put out like a green little note at the end. If you don't see that on the flowers, then it's going to be a male. So while these plants are fairly rare, you can find them online. Have had no luck finding them locally at Phoenix tropical nurseries, but definitely, you know, going eBay or Etsy, you should be able to find someone in Florida selling at least small starts. Now this plant in particular was a more recent purchase. This was one I got from Lara Farms in Florida, and what's special about this plant is this was actually grafted. It's a grafted female, and it was labeled as Fairchild, so I'm not sure if this is actually acquired from Fairchild Farms out there in Florida. What some people will say is that you can actually tell the gender of the plant from the leaf shape. I'm not sure how accurate that is, but knowing that this is a female plant, people say, you know, the leaves are really rounded on the female plants. And you can see, at least with this plant, all the leaves appear rounded. So that kind of jives with that statement. They say with the male leaves that they'll have a point at the end, kind of like this. And like this, you can see it's a more narrow leaf and it's pointed, not rounded. What's interesting about this plant is I'm seeing some rounded leaves too, where the point isn't sharp. So this plant I actually purchased from Miami Fruit. So that's a place online where you can actually purchase fruit to try. And they also sell some plants. And this was one I got from them. This is a seedling, not a grafted plant. So this might actually be a hermaphrodite. Not sure. Again, I'll have to wait until it flowers. So these two plants that I've got in ground, they are about 2 years old at this point. The ones in containers are a bit younger, and I can tell you that at least growing them in containers, they're very slow to grow. What I also found was these plants have an extremely long taproot. Even these small starter plants had this huge taproot that I had to trim down because it was circling the pot, even when it was only a few months old. So these guys really want to plunge deep in the ground, and what I've heard is they really take off once you put them in ground. So that's why I decided to plant these now. So I imagine with that really long taproot, being that they're now in the ground, rather than being constricted by that container, they can really start growing. And as far as mature size, these are said to just get to about 10 to 12 feet, even in Florida in a more ideal climate. So these are not going to be huge trees, really more of a bush or small tree. And I'll keep them pruned up because obviously they're very close in this densely planted area. So another reason why I was intrigued by this plant is they're said to actually do really well with salt, which, as you know, our salt content is quite high in the Phoenix, Arizona area. So the fact that these plants can do well in that is a good thing. They're really adaptive to a variety of soil types as well, and they're wind tolerant. So for all those reasons, it seems like they're gonna do pretty well in our environment. My container plants have all gone through about 9 months of Phoenix weather, so they definitely can handle the heat. I would put them in afternoon shade though. And as far as cold tolerance, I've read that they're good down to 28 degrees, and they are completely frost intolerant. So you might question why I put this in the ground at this point, given that we are headed into winter and we might have frost. And that's actually the reason why I planted this in this location, is because it is going to be under this cold frame. And the intent is to cover this in 2.5 ounce frost cloth so that they will not experience any frost. And then beyond that, if our temperatures plunge below the 30s, then I will be able to put a heat source in here to make sure that these guys don't experience anything in the 20s. So I only know of one other YouTube channel in Arizona growing this plant, Mel Palmer, out in Mesa. So it'll be really interesting to see how viable these are for our area between self-growing this and another gardener out there. Many people find this fruit to be superior to lemon drop mangosteen, so Really hoping to share progress of these plants as they grow, and one day a tasting. Hope you found this interesting. Thanks for watching, and happy gardening.